Under the pale light of a full moon, 12-year-old Naruto Uzumaki sat on a lonely hill outside Konoha, staring down at the village that treated him like a disease. His hands clenched at the earth beneath him, frustration burning in his chest. Today had been another failure, a prank gone wrong, Irika yelling, the villagers' hateful stares piercing him like kunai. But tonight was different. The wind whispered to him, carrying a strange hum that thrummed in his ears. Naruto turned, his cerulean eyes narrowing as the sound drew him toward the dark woods. It wasn't fear that guided him. Naruto never feared the unknown. No, it was something else. A pull. A calling. As he trudged through the thick undergrowth, his frustration grew into raw anger. Stupid villagers, he muttered. Stupid teachers. Stupid world. The words dripped with venom. He wanted to show them. To make them understand what it meant to ignore him. The forest opened into a hidden clearing, revealing an ancient stone shrine half buried in moss. A faint, ethereal glow emanated from a massive, ink-black brush resting on a pedestal. Its presence felt alive, suffocating the air with a heavy, otherworldly power. Naruto stepped closer, heart pounding. What is this? His fingers brushed against the brush's dark wood, and his vision blurred. The world dissolved into blackness. Naruto found himself floating in a void, a realm painted with nothing but ink and shadow. In front of him stood a massive figure, eyes glowing like twin suns. It radiated power, authority, and something Naruto couldn't name: truth. I am Ichibe Hyosube, the figure boomed, its voice reverberating through the void. And you are the one who will carry my legacy. Naruto blinked. Your legacy? What the hell are you talking about? And why should I care? Ichibe chuckled, a deep, resonant sound that sent shivers through the void. Because you and I are alike, boy. Outcasts. Misunderstood. Yet, we hold the power to shape the world not with brute strength, but by commanding the very essence of existence. You've been chosen to wield my power. To rename and redefine this broken world as you see fit. The figure gestured, and the void erupted with symbols, names, and meanings floating around Naruto. With my power, you will control names, the true source of all things. A name is identity. A name is power. Take this gift, boy, and decide what your path will be. Naruto hesitated for only a moment. He didn't care for explanations or long speeches. All he knew was that power, real power, was being offered to him. Power to make them all pay. He grinned. Fine. Let's do this. Naruto woke with a start, his hand still gripping the massive brush. But now, something had changed. His eyes, once bright and full of mischief, glowed with an unsettling black and gold hue. He felt it coursing through him, the names, the meanings, the concepts. He could feel the world itself bending to his will. A rustling in the bushes pulled him from his thoughts. Mizuki stepped into the clearing, a smirk plastered across his face. So this is where you're hiding, demon brat. I heard you took the forbidden scroll. Hand it over, or I'll. Naruto didn't even let him finish. Raising the brush, he swiped it through the air. A streak of black ink shimmered briefly before vanishing. Mizuki froze, his body trembling. What did you do to me? Mizuki gasped, clutching his chest. Naruto tilted his head, a cold smirk tugging at his lips. I erased your name. You're nothing now. Just a nobody. I wonder, can you even breathe without a name? Mizuki collapsed to the ground, gasping like a fish out of water. Naruto didn't flinch. He didn't care. Let the man choke. He'd had enough of their lies, their hatred. With a flick of his wrist, Naruto walked away, leaving Mizuki to ride in the dirt. The next morning, Konoha stirred with unease. Whispers spread of strange occurrences. A villager claimed their tools wouldn't work, as if their purpose had vanished. Another found their name slipping from their memory, leaving them confused and aimless. Naruto strolled through the streets, his oversized brush slung over his shoulder. The villagers' usual scornful gazes faltered when they met his eyes. There was something different about him now, an air of authority, of danger. "Move," he said coldly to a merchant blocking his path. The man stumbled back, as if Naruto's voice alone carried weight. Iruka found him sitting at the academy steps. "Naruto," he shouted, running up to him. "What happened last night?" "Mizuki's gone. And the Hokage." "I don't care, Iruka-sensei," Naruto interrupted, his voice calm but laced with menace. "I finally figured it out. This village. These people. They're nothing to me." Iruka blinked in shock. "What are you saying, Naruto? Konoha is your home." "My home?" Naruto chuckled darkly. "This place has never been my home. I'm done playing their game, Iruka-sensei. From now on, I make my own rules." Iruka reached out, but Naruto raised his brush, black ink swirling in the air. "Don't," Naruto warned. "I've already started rewriting this world. Don't make me erase you too." Iruka froze, his instincts screaming at him to step back. He'd never seen Naruto like this before. This wasn't the boy who craved attention and approval. This was someone terrifying. Naruto stood at the gates of Konoha, gazing out at the vast world beyond. For the first time, he felt free. He didn't need the village, its people, or their acceptance. He had the power to define his own destiny, to shape the world into whatever he wanted. With a single step, he crossed the threshold, leaving the village behind. Let them hate him. Fear him. It didn't matter anymore. Naruto Uzumaki had transcended their petty lives, and now, the world would bow to the weight of his name or lose theirs entirely. Naruto walked away from Konoha without looking back, his oversized brush resting on his shoulder. Each step he took seemed to carry a weight the earth itself acknowledged, the ground beneath him darkening ever so slightly as if bowing to his presence. The forest stretched endlessly before him, a sea of green that whispered promises of freedom and power. Naruto's lips curved into a smirk. The village, its rules, its people, they were nothing more than fading echoes now. He was no longer shackled by their expectations. He was rewriting the world. Dash. Days later. The sun blazed high in the sky, its heat bearing down on a squad of Konoha Umbu moving silently through the forest. Their mission was clear: locate and retrieve Naruto Uzumaki. Alive. Leading the squad was a veteran with a hawk mask. He gestured for his team to halt, sensing something unnatural in the air. The forest felt off. Shadows stretched in unnatural directions, and the usual hum of wildlife was absent. "Be cautious," the hawk mask leader whispered. "We're entering an area under his influence." One of the younger Umbus coughed. "We're Umbu. He's just a kid with a new toy." A flicker of black ink streaked through the air, and the scoffing Umbu froze mid-sentence. His body convulsed, then crumpled to the ground. "What the?" another Umbu hissed, drawing a kunai. The hawk mask leader knelt by the fallen comrade, his eyes narrowing. The man wasn't dead, but he was blank. His presence, his chakra's signature, even his name, it was as if he no longer existed. "Fall back," the leader commanded, but it was too late. Naruto emerged from the shadows, his brush dragging lazily against the air, leaving streaks of black ink that seemed to defy gravity. His golden black eyes glowed with an eerie confidence. "You guys never learn, do you?" Naruto said, his voice calm, almost bored. The remaining Umbu sprang into action, hurling shuriken and unleashing jutsu. Fire roared, wind howled, and weapons flew, but none of it mattered. Naruto moved through their attacks like a specter, each stroke of his brush rewriting reality itself. One Umbu unleashed a massive fireball, only for Naruto to swipe his brush across the air. The fireball vanished, its name stolen before it could even touch him. "You think your jutsu matter?" Naruto said, his smirk widening. "Names give them meaning. And I own their names now." With a casual flick, he wrote a single kanji mid-air, "nothing." The forest fell silent. The remaining Umbu gasped as their weapons, chakra, and even the ground beneath their feet seemed to dissolve into nothingness. The Hawk Mask leader dropped to one knee, panting. "Naruto, why are you doing this?" "The village." "Doesn't matter," Naruto interrupted, stepping closer. "All my life, you people looked at me like I was nothing. So, I became something. Now, you'll all understand what it means to truly be nothing." The leader's vision blurred as Naruto raised his brush for a final stroke. "Goodbye, Konoha's shadow dogs," Naruto said, his tone devoid of emotion. With one final swipe, the squad's names vanished, and with them, their existence. #### The world takes notice. Word spread like wildfire. Towns whispered of a boy who wielded a power unlike anything the world had ever seen. In the land of fire, merchants spoke of a shadowy figure whose presence erased entire squads of shinobi. In the land of wind, travelers claimed to have seen the sky darken as black ink devoured the horizon. The other great nations began to act. In the land of earth, Tsuchika Joniki sat in his stone-carved chair, frowning at the reports before him. "A boy who can erase names and jutsu," he muttered. "This isn't just some rogue shinobi. This is a force that could destabilize the entire balance of power." He turned to his advisors. "Send scouts. And warn the other Kage. If this boy keeps moving unchecked, none of us are safe." In the land of lightning, the Raikage smashed his desk in frustration. "This brat dares to challenge the order of the world? Let him come. I'll show him the power of true strength." But in the land of fire, Sarutobi Hiruzen sat in silence. The third Hokage gazed out of his office window, his pipe clenched tightly between his teeth. He felt the weight of his failure. "First Orochimaru, now Naruto," he muttered. "How many more must we lose before this village learns the cost of neglect?" A shadow moved behind him. "Hokage-sama," Jiraiya said, stepping forward. "I've returned. If what I've heard is true, Naruto isn't the same boy I trained. He's something else." Hiruzen nodded gravely. "Can you stop him, Jiraiya?" Jiraiya hesitated. "I don't know. But I'll try. If anyone can reach him, it's me." Naruto's New World. Meanwhile, Naruto sat atop a massive boulder overlooking a small town. The moon bathed the land in silver light, and his brush rested across his lap. He could sense the world stirring against him, shinobi scrambling, Kage plotting. It didn't matter. None of them mattered. He dipped the tip of his brush into an inkwell that materialized from thin air. With a slow, deliberate motion, he began to write in the air, kanji glowing in the dark. Freedom. The kanji expanded, spreading across the horizon, its meaning saturating the air. Below him, the town seemed to shift. People stopped their tasks, their movements suddenly more fluid, their lives less burdened. The oppressive systems that had chained them for generations dissolved, replaced by something simpler. Naruto smiled faintly. He didn't need to conquer the world to change it. He didn't need their approval or their love. He was done chasing dreams that belonged to someone else. The world was his canvas now, and he would paint it in his image. The quiet hum of the town below was soon disrupted. A loud boom echoed through the valley, shaking the very air. Naruto didn't flinch, his golden black eyes watching as dust clouds rose in the distance. Finally, he muttered, standing up from his perch. His brush glimmered under the moonlight as he twirled it in his hand, anticipation tingling at the edge of his senses. From the dust, a group of shinobi emerged. They were clad in dark cloaks bearing the insignia of Konoha, their chakras signatures pulsing with deadly intent. At the head of the group was Jiraiya, his usual jovial demeanor replaced by a cold determination. "Naruto," Jiraiya called, his voice steady but carrying a hint of regret. "You've gone far enough." Naruto raised an eyebrow, a smirk tugging at his lips. "Far enough? I've barely started." He leaped down from the boulder, landing gracefully in the middle of the open field between the shinobi and the town. Jiraiya gestured to the shinobi behind him, and they spread out, forming a wide circle around Naruto. Each of them radiated tension, weapons drawn, ready to strike. "I'm here to bring you back," Jiraiya said, stepping forward. "But if you don't come willingly," his tone hardened. "I'll stop you, no matter what it takes." Naruto tilted his head, his smirk fading into a look of mild irritation. "Bring me back. To what? The village that tossed me aside? The people who spat on me every chance they got?" He shook his head, his brush twirling in his hand. "You don't get it, Jiraiya. I don't need Konoha. And I sure as hell don't need you." Jiraiya's jaw tightened. "This isn't about you anymore, Naruto. Your power, it's dangerous. You've already erased lives, destabilized towns. If you keep this up, you'll plunge the entire world into chaos." Naruto laughed, the sound cold and hollow. "Chaos? You think this world isn't already chaotic? You cling to your rules and your order, but all they do is breed pain and suffering. I'm not destabilizing anything, I'm remaking it. And if you can't see that..." The brush in his hand ignited with black ink, the air around it rippling with power. "Then you're just another name I'll have to erase." Dash. The tension snapped like a drawn wire. Jiraiya weaved hand signs in a blur, slamming his palms onto the ground. Summoning jutsu. A massive puff of smoke erupted, revealing Gamabunta, the toad boss, towering over the field. His eyes narrowed as he looked down at Naruto. "So, this is the brat causing all the trouble?" Gamabunta rumbled, his voice deep and gravelly. "You've got guts, kid, but don't think I'll go easy on you." Naruto didn't even blink. Instead, he raised his brush and flicked it upward. A wave of ink surged from the ground, climbing into the sky before crashing down toward Gamabunta like a tidal wave. Gamabunta roared, leaping backward as the ink splashed against the earth, dissolving it into an inky void. Where the ground once was, there was now only black nothingness, a yawning abyss that defied logic. "Watch yourself, Jiraiya," Gamabunta shouted. "This kid's not playing around." Jiraiya leaped onto Gamabunta's back, weaving more hand signs. "Naruto, this is your last chance. Stop this madness, or we'll take you down." Naruto sighed, his eyes glowing brighter. "You keep talking like you have a choice." He slammed the tip of his brush into the ground, writing a massive kanji, seal. The kanji expanded, glowing ominously as chains of ink shot out from it, wrapping around Gamabunta's legs and binding him in place. The toad struggled, roaring as the chains tightened, their weight pressing him down. "Damn it!" Jiraiya cursed, leaping off Gamabunta as the massive toad was pulled into the inky void. "Too slow," Naruto said, appearing behind Jiraiya in a blur of motion. He slashed his brush through the air, leaving a streak of ink aimed directly at his former mentor. Jiraiya barely dodged, flipping backward and launching a barrage of kunai. Naruto waved his brush dismissively, and the kunai froze mid-air before dissolving into black specks. "I told you, Jiraiya," Naruto said, his voice calm yet dripping with disdain. "Your tricks don't work on me. Your jutsu, your weapons, your will of fire, none of it matters anymore." Jiraiya landed in a crouch, sweat dripping down his face. "You've really fallen far, Naruto, he said, his voice heavy. But I won't give up on you. No matter what, I'll find a way to bring you back. Naruto chuckled, shaking his head. Bring me back to what? A cage. Keep dreaming, old man. He raised his brush once more, writing another kanji in the air, and the air around Jiraiya trembled, a crushing force bearing down on him. His vision darkened as the kanji pulsed with overwhelming power. For a moment, it felt like the world itself was closing in. But before the final stroke could land, an explosion of light erupted from the horizon. A figure appeared, standing in the distance, cloaked in golden chakra. Naruto, the voice called, firm and commanding. Naruto turned, his glowing eyes narrowing. Minato. The fourth Hokage stepped forward, his face grim but resolute. The weight of a father's guilt and a shinobi's duty burned in his gaze. It's time we talked, Minato said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Naruto's smirk returned, but it was colder this time, sharper. Fine, he said, raising his brush. But I'm not promising you'll survive the conversation. Naruto's gaze locked onto Minato, his brush dripping with black ink that seemed alive, pulsating with latent power. The field was deathly silent, the air thick with tension. Minato didn't flinch, but his expression revealed a mix of sorrow and resolve. I failed you, Naruto, Minato said, his voice steady despite the chaos swirling around him. But I can't let you destroy everything because of my mistakes. Naruto's smirk widened, but there was no humor in it. You're late, Dad. Where was all this concern when the villagers were spitting on me? When your precious village turned its back on me? Minato's shoulders sagged slightly, but he didn't lower his guard. I had my reasons, but they don't justify what you've become. I won't run from this. If I have to stop you to protect Konoha, I will. Naruto laughed, a cold, hollow sound. Protect Konoha? You mean the same village that threw me away? Don't make me laugh, Minato. Let me show you what your will of fire really means. With a flick of his brush, Naruto carved the kanji for shadow into the air. The entire field was plunged into darkness, the oppressive weight of the ink blotting out the sun. Minato tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for a kunai. This power, it's not natural. What have you become, Naruto? Something more than you could ever understand, Naruto replied, his voice echoing ominously through the void. Minato barely had time to react as tendrils of ink shot toward him from all directions. With blinding speed, he threw a marked kunai, teleporting out of the way using the Flying Thunder God technique. He reappeared behind Naruto, Rasengan in hand, aiming for his son's back. But Naruto didn't move. The Rasengan struck true, or it should have. Instead, the orb of spiraling chakra disintegrated the moment it touched Naruto, its name stolen by his power. Minato's eyes widened in shock as the ink around Naruto flared, forming a barrier that pushed him back. You don't get it, do you? Naruto said, turning to face Minato. Your techniques, your legacy, they're meaningless to me now. I rewrite the rules. Minato gritted his teeth, his mind racing. Then I'll just have to stop you before you can rewrite anything. The battle begins. Minato flickered across the battlefield, a golden blur as he threw marked kunai in every direction, creating a web of teleportation points. He appeared and disappeared at impossible speeds, his attacks relentless. Naruto stood at the center of the chaos, calm and unbothered. With each attack, he countered effortlessly, his brush painting seals in the air that nullified Minato's techniques. You're fast, Naruto admitted, watching as Minato appeared behind him yet again. But speed means nothing if you can't land a hit. Minato didn't reply, instead forming a massive Rasengan in his hand. This time, he infused it with the chakra of the 9 tails, its power roaring to life. Naruto's eyes flickered with mild interest as the glowing orb hurtled toward him. Let's see how you handle this. Minato shouted, driving the Raise-Non forward. Naruto raised his brush, writing a single word, void. The Raise-Non stopped inches from his body, its energy collapsing into a swirling black hole that devoured it entirely. Minato staggered back, his chakra flaring as he tried to regroup. This is pointless, Naruto said, his voice cold. You can't beat me. None of you can. The world watches. Far away, in the hidden cloud village, the Raikage watched the battle through a crystal orb, his fists clenched. This kid, he's a monster, he muttered, his voice tinged with both anger and fear. In the hidden stone village, Oniki hovered above his desk, his old eyes narrowing as he observed the destruction. This is no ordinary shinobi. If we don't act soon, the entire shinobi world will fall to him. Even in the hidden mist, the Mizukage stared in horror at the unfolding events. He's rewriting reality itself, she whispered. How do we fight something like that? The cage began to mobilize, sending their strongest warriors to intercept the growing threat. A father's last stand. Back on the battlefield, Minato was breathing heavily, sweat dripping from his brow. Despite his best efforts, Naruto remained untouchable. You're strong, I'll give you that, Minato said, his tone heavy. But you've lost your way, Naruto. This isn't the son I hope to protect. Naruto's expression hardened. The son you hope to protect? Don't make me laugh. You didn't protect me. You protected her. Minato's eyes flickered with pain. He knew who Naruto meant, Mito, Naruto's younger sister. The one they had chosen to focus on, believing her to be the child of prophecy. You abandoned me for her, Naruto continued, his voice laced with venom. Now you want to act like you care? You're pathetic. Minato lowered his head, guilt washing over him. You're right. I failed you. I failed as a father, as a Hokage. But I can't let your pain destroy the world. Naruto's eyes glowed brighter, his brush crackling with energy. You don't get to lecture me, Minato. This world is mine now, and I'll do with it as I please. With a sweep of his brush, Naruto wrote the kanji for end. The air trembled, the ground splitting apart as the symbol pulsed with raw power. This is the end for you, Naruto said, his voice final. Minato didn't move. Instead, he closed his eyes, a faint smile crossing his lips. I'm sorry, Naruto, he whispered. In a flash of golden light, Minato disappeared, reappearing directly in front of Naruto. He wasn't holding a Raise-Non or a kunai, just his bare hands. Before Naruto could react, Minato wrapped his arms around his son in a tight embrace. Naruto froze. For a moment, the battlefield was silent, the oppressive darkness lifting slightly. I'm sorry, Minato repeated, his voice breaking. For everything. Naruto's brush trembled in his hand. The kanji for end hovered in the air, its power ready to unleash. But for the first time, Naruto hesitated. Don't try to manipulate me, Naruto growled, his voice shaking. It won't work. I'm not, Minato said, his grip tightening. I wanted you to know, before it's too late. Naruto's eyes burned with conflicting emotions. For a brief second, the godlike power surrounding him faltered. And then, with a scream of rage, Naruto shoved Minato away, his brush slashing through the air. The kanji for end erupted in a wave of destruction, consuming everything in its path. When the dust settled, Naruto stood alone, the battlefield scorched and lifeless. Minato was gone, his chakra signature erased completely. Naruto stared at the empty space where his father had stood, his expression unreadable. Too late, he muttered, turning away. The world had lost a Hokage. But Naruto's war was far from over. The field lay in utter devastation, an expanse of blackened earth and silence. The oppressive darkness Naruto had summoned lingered like a shroud, blotting out the stars. He stood motionless, his brush hanging at his side, as if waiting for something, an answer, a sign, or perhaps a challenge. None came. Naruto exhaled slowly, a cold smirk forming on his face. So much for the fourth Hokage, he muttered, his voice cutting through the stillness. He turned toward the distant village, the faint glimmer of its lights mocking him from afar. His gaze sharpened. Konoha, you've run out of heroes. It's time to face the consequences. In Konoha, the remaining village elders and jonin assembled in the Hokage's office, their faces grim. Tsunade, standing at the center, clenched her fists tightly. "You're sure Minato is gone?" she asked, her voice low but trembling with restrained fury. An Umbu knelt before her, his mask cracked and his uniform bloodied. "Yes, Lady Hokage. We felt his chakra vanish completely." "Naruto," he erased him. The room fell silent, the weight of the revelation settling like a heavy fog. "This boy," Danzo said, breaking the silence, his tone icy and calculated, "is no longer a mere threat. He is an extinction-level force. If we don't act decisively, Konoha no, the entire shinobi world will fall." Tsunade's amber eyes flashed with rage. "He's still a child. A child we failed. Minato's death doesn't change that. Your sentimentality will doom us all," Danzo snapped, his lone eye glaring at her. "Naruto is beyond saving. If we don't unite with the other villages and strike him down now, there won't be a world left to save." Shikaku Nara, standing near the window, folded his arms. "The boy's power is unprecedented. The fact that he nullified the Flying Thunder God technique and destroyed Minato outright means conventional strategies won't work." "What are you suggesting?" Tsunade asked, though her voice carried a note of dread. Shikaku hesitated, then said, "We may need to rely on forces beyond our control. Weapons, forbidden techniques, alliances, anything that gives us an edge." "Enough." Tsunade slammed her fist into the desk, splitting it in two. "We're not bargaining with monsters or selling our souls just yet. If Naruto is coming for us, we'll face him together. Konoha doesn't abandon its own, not again." Danzo scoffed but remained silent. Tsunade looked around the room, her voice steady but commanding. "Prepare the defenses. Evacuate the civilians. If Naruto Uzumaki is truly coming for Konoha, we'll be ready." The March of a God. Naruto walked through the forest that bordered Konoha, each step causing the ground beneath him to ripple with dark energy. His presence alone twisted the natural order, leaves wilting and trees bending unnaturally in his wake. The distant sounds of the village bells echoed through the night, signaling an emergency. Naruto chuckled softly. "They're finally taking me seriously," he said, his voice laced with amusement. As he neared the outskirts of the village, a group of shinobi appeared before him, their chakra signatures flaring in defiance. At their head stood Kakashi Hatake, his Sharingan exposed and his expression grim. "Kakashi-sensei," Naruto said mockingly. "Are you here to stop me too?" "How noble." Kakashi's lone eye narrowed. "Naruto, this isn't you. Whatever power you've gained, it's consuming you. Let us help you before it's too late." Naruto tilted his head, genuinely amused. "Help me? You all had your chance. This is who I've always been. The village just never cared to see it." He raised his brush, its tip glowing with an ominous black aura. "But don't worry. I'll make sure you never forget me." Kakashi didn't hesitate. "Formation," he shouted, and the shinobi around him launched into action. Konoha flew, fireballs roared, and chakra-infused blades cut through the air. But Naruto was unfazed. With a single stroke of his brush, he painted a massive kanji, repel. A wave of black energy exploded outward, nullifying every attack and sending the shinobi flying. Kakashi landed hard, coughing as he tried to regain his footing. "This is pointless," Naruto said, walking toward him. "You're wasting your lives for a village that doesn't deserve it?" Kakashi gritted his teeth, his Sharingan spinning as he prepared to unleash Kamui. But Naruto was faster. In the blink of an eye, he appeared in front of Kakashi, his brush poised to strike. "Goodbye, sensei." Before Naruto could finish the blow, a bright flash of golden chakra erupted behind him. He turned, his eyes narrowing as Midou Uzumaki stepped forward, her form enveloped in the Nine-Tails power. "Leave him alone, Naruto," she shouted, her voice fierce but tinged with desperation. Naruto sighed, his expression shifting to one of disdain. "Ah, the golden child. Finally decided to join the fight." "I'm here to stop you," Midou said, her chakra flaring as she summoned a massive chakra claw. "You're hurting innocent people, Naruto. This isn't right." "Innocent?" Naruto laughed, the sound dark and bitter. "Don't talk to me about innocence, Midou. You have no idea what it's like to be cast aside while you're worshipped as a hero. I never asked for that." Midou shot back, her voice breaking. "But you took it," Naruto said coldly. "And now, you're going to pay for it." Sibling showdown. The forest shook as their powers clashed, Naruto's ink constructs meeting Midou's chakra-infused attacks. Each blow sent shockwaves rippling through the area, uprooting trees, and shattering the earth. Midou poured everything she had into the fight, her Nine-Tails cloak roaring with intensity. She created massive chakra arms, swiping at Naruto with relentless fury. But Naruto was untouchable. He weaved between her attacks effortlessly, his brush painting symbols in the air that countered her every move. "You're out of your depth," Naruto said, his voice calm but condescending. "You've always relied on the Nine-Tails power. But that power is nothing compared to mine." Midou gritted her teeth, refusing to back down. "I won't let you win, Naruto. No matter what it takes." Naruto smirked, raising his brush to write another kanji. But before he could finish, Midou formed a massive Raise-nan, its energy crackling with the combined power of her chakra and the Nine-Tails. With a defiant scream, she hurled the Raise-nan at Naruto, its energy tearing through the air. Naruto didn't move. Instead, he raised his brush and wrote a single, elegant stroke, "Seal." The Raise-nan stopped mid-flight, its energy collapsing in on itself before vanishing completely. Midou staggered, her chakra flickering as exhaustion began to set in. "You tried," Naruto said, his voice almost pitying. "But you were never going to win." He pointed his brush at her, preparing to end the fight. But as the ink began to gather, a blinding light erupted from the sky. Naruto looked up, his eyes narrowing as a massive figure descended. It was a combined force of the 5 Kage, their chakra signatures blazing with power. At their head was Tsunade, her expression grim. "Enough, Naruto," she said, her voice echoing through the battlefield. "This ends now." Naruto's smirk returned, but this time it was laced with excitement. "Finally," he said. "A real fight." The descent of the 5 Kage was a spectacle that split the heavens, their combined power radiating a brilliance that even the oppressive darkness surrounding Naruto couldn't fully suppress. Their presence commanded the battlefield, a unified front standing against the overwhelming force that Naruto had become. Naruto lowered his brush slightly, his smirk widening into something more predatory. "So, the big players have arrived," he drawled, his tone mocking. "Is this supposed to impress me? Because honestly, it doesn't." Tsunade stepped forward, her ember eyes blazing. "Naruto, you've gone too far. You've abandoned everything your parents and this village stood for. If you don't stand down now, we'll have no choice but to end this here and now." Naruto laughed a cold, sharp sound that echoed ominously. "End this? You think you can end me? You're all just ants trying to move a mountain. But sure, entertain me. Without hesitation, Onaki, the Tsuchikage, flew into action, hovering in the air and weaving hand signs. Don't underestimate us, boy. Particle style, atomic dismantling jutsu. A cube of radiant white energy shot toward Naruto, its destructive force tearing through the air. Naruto didn't flinch. With a flick of his brush, he painted a single kanji in the air, shatter. The particle-style technique stopped mid-flight, breaking apart into harmless particles that dissipated into nothingness. Onaki's eyes widened in shock. Impossible. Not impossible, Naruto corrected, his voice calm. I just erased the concept of your technique's existence. Try again. Clash of Titans. The Raikage, shot forward with blinding speed, his lightning release armor crackling around him. He appeared in front of Naruto in an instant, his fist aimed directly for Naruto's head. Naruto sidestepped effortlessly, his brush twirling in his hand as he wrote another kanji, slow. Eyes movements faltered as the kanji glowed brightly, his speed suddenly reduced to a sluggish crawl. What? I growled, struggling against the unseen force. Naruto leaned in close, his smirk mocking. Speed won't help you if I decide it doesn't. Before Naruto could finish him, Mei Terumi, the Mizukage, unleashed a torrent of lava from behind. Lava release, melting apparition jutsu. Naruto raised his brush without turning, painting the kanji for extinguish. The lava cooled instantly, solidifying into harmless stone before it even reached him. He finally turned to face her, his expression almost bored. Is this really the best the cage have to offer? Disappointing. Tsunade appeared beside him in a flash, her superhuman strength aimed in a devastating punch. This time, Naruto allowed the blow to land. The ground beneath them shattered, the shock wave rippling outward and uprooting trees. But as the dust cleared, Naruto stood unharmed, his body encased in a shimmering black aura. Not bad, he said, his tone almost impressed. But you're still not strong enough. He grabbed Tsunade's wrist with inhuman speed, twisting her arm and sending her flying into the rubble with a single motion. Desperation sets in. Gaara, the Kazekage, took the opportunity to strike while Naruto was distracted. His sand surged forward, forming massive tendrils that attempted to ensnare Naruto. Naruto raised an eyebrow, his brush moving gracefully. You think sand can hold me? With a single stroke, he wrote the kanji for subdue. Gaara's sand froze mid-air, then collapsed to the ground in a lifeless heap. You're all so predictable, Naruto said, his tone dripping with disdain. Attacking me from every angle, hoping I'll slip up. It's almost cute. Gaara clenched his fists, his usually calm demeanor faltering. We won't give up, Naruto. No matter what it takes. Give up. Naruto repeated, his voice rising with amusement. You've already lost. You just don't know it yet. Unity amid chaos. Despite their failures, the cage regrouped, their chakra flaring as they prepared for another assault. Together, Tsunade commanded, blood dripping from a cut on her forehead. We strike together. No holding back. Naruto watched them, his expression unreadable. So, this is your final stand, he mused. Fine. Let's see what you've got. The cage launched their combined attack, their techniques merging into a single devastating force. Lava, lightning, sand, chakra-infused punches, and particle style converged into a storm of destruction, all aimed directly at Naruto. The ground quaked, the air roared, and the forest disintegrated under the sheer power of the assault. When the dust settled, a massive crater remained. The cage stood at its edge, panting and battered but hopeful. But Naruto was still standing, untouched, his brush glowing with an ominous black light. Was that it? He asked, genuine disappointment in his voice. The Kage stared in disbelief. You never stood a chance, Naruto continued. You're bound by rules, by limits. But I'm free. I've transcended all of that. And now, it's time to show you what that means. The true power of a god. Naruto raised his brush high, its tip glowing brighter than ever. The kanji he painted this time was massive, stretching across the sky. Annihilate. The air grew heavy, the kanji radiating a suffocating force. The Kage could barely move, their chakra flaring desperately in an attempt to resist. Goodbye, Naruto said simply, his voice cold and final. But before the kanji could activate, a blinding flash of white light enveloped the battlefield. Naruto shielded his eyes, his smirk fading as he felt an unfamiliar presence of power that rivaled his own. As the light subsided, a figure emerged, cloaked in radiant energy. It was Ichigo Satsuki, the sage of six paths himself, his expression solemn. Enough, Naruto, Ichigo said, his voice echoing with authority. Your path ends here. Naruto's eyes narrowed, his grip tightening on his brush. You think you can stop me, old man? You're just another relic of a broken system. Higoromo's gaze didn't waver. Perhaps. But even gods must answer for their actions. The battlefield fell silent as the two powers prepared to clash, the fate of the world hanging in the balance. Higoromo's presence shifted the battlefield into something surreal. The air shimmered with the weight of his power, creating an otherworldly calm that contrasted sharply with the devastation around him. The five Kage, battered and bloodied, could only watch in silent awe. Naruto tilted his head, his brush still glowing ominously. So, the so-called Sage of Six Paths finally makes an appearance. Took you long enough. Higoromo's expression was grave. I did not interfere before because I hoped you would choose another path. I see now that hope was misplaced. Naruto chuckled, his tone mocking. Spare me the lecture. You're just another cog in the machine, another piece of the system that's done nothing but oppress the weak. Don't pretend you're here for justice. I am here, Ichigo replied, his voice steady, because your actions threaten the balance of this world. You have allowed your pain to consume you, and now you seek to destroy everything in your path. Naruto's smirk widened. Finally, someone gets it? Ichigo sighed. If you insist on this course, then I have no choice but to stop you. Naruto raised his brush, black energy swirling around him like a living storm. You're welcome to try, old man. Clash of Titans. The battlefield erupted as the two forces collided. Ichigo raised his staff, channeling the full might of his chakra. Naruto countered with sweeping strokes of his brush, each kanji he painted summoning devastating waves of black energy that twisted reality itself. Ichigo thrust his staff forward, releasing an enormous orb of truth-seeking balls that expanded into a spiraling wave of destruction. Naruto responded by painting the kanji barrier, erecting an impenetrable wall of black energy that absorbed the attack entirely. You're strong, Naruto admitted, his eyes gleaming with excitement. But strength alone won't save you. He painted another kanji, collapse. The ground beneath Ichigo cracked and shattered, creating a massive sinkhole that threatened to swallow him. Ichigo hovered above it, unperturbed. You underestimate the resolve of those who protect this world. With a wave of his staff, he summoned a celestial storm of light and chakra that rained down upon Naruto like meteors. Naruto dodged effortlessly, his brush moving in quick, precise strokes. Each kanji he painted neutralized the incoming attacks, leaving him unscathed. You talk like you're some kind of savior, Naruto said, his voice cold. But where were you when I needed saving? Where were you when the world cast me aside? Higoromo's gaze softened, but his resolve did not falter. I cannot undo the pain you've endured, Naruto. But I can stop you from inflicting it on others. Beyond mortality. Naruto's aura darkened, his power growing exponentially. The kanji glowing around him now seemed alive, writhing and twisting as if feeding off his emotions. "You're still clinging to that broken ideology," Naruto said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Let me show you what true freedom looks like." He painted the kanji, infinity, releasing a wave of energy so vast it seemed to stretch beyond the boundaries of the world itself. The sky darkened, and the stars vanished, leaving only an endless void. Higoromo's eyes widened slightly. "You're tampering with forces you don't fully understand." Naruto laughed, his voice filled with defiance. "Don't lecture me, old man. I understand it perfectly. This world doesn't deserve balance. It deserves to be rewritten." Ichigo raised his staff, his chakra flaring brighter than ever. "If you will not listen to reason, then I have no choice but to seal you away." He began weaving intricate seals in the air, his chakra resonating with the energy of the world itself. The ground trembled as a massive sigil formed beneath Naruto, glowing with ancient power. Naruto's smirk didn't falter. "Seal me? You think you can bind me with your outdated tricks?" With a flourish of his brush, he painted the kanji, "Release." The sigil beneath him shattered instantly, its energy dissipating like smoke. Higoromo's calm demeanor faltered for the first time. "That's right," Naruto said, his voice filled with triumph. "Your seals mean nothing to me. I'm rewriting the rules of this world, and there's nothing you can do to stop me." The turning tide. Despite his overwhelming power, Naruto began to feel the strain of the battle. Higoromo's attacks were relentless, each strike infused with the wisdom and strength of centuries. "You're powerful," Ichigo admitted. "But power alone is not enough. True strength comes from understanding and connection, not destruction." Naruto sneered. "Spare me your platitudes." But deep down, something in Higoromo's words struck a nerve. For a brief moment, Naruto hesitated, memories of his childhood flashing through his mind, the loneliness, the rejection, and the rare moments of kindness he had experienced. The hesitation was fleeting, but it was enough for Ichigo to seize the opportunity. He unleashed a torrent of chakra, binding Naruto in a web of light. Naruto struggled against the bonds, his eyes blazing with fury. "You think this will hold me? It's not meant to hold you," Ichigo said. "It's meant to remind you." The web of light pulsed, and Naruto's mind was flooded with visions, his parents sacrificing themselves to save him, Irika's unwavering support, and the friends who had tried to reach out to him despite his pain. For the first time, Naruto's confidence wavered. "No," he growled, his voice trembling. "Don't try to manipulate me with your lies." "A choice." Ichigo approached slowly, his staff glowing faintly. "Naruto, the path you're on will lead only to emptiness. You have the power to reshape the world, but what kind of world will it be if it's built on hatred?" Naruto stared at him, the storm of emotions inside him threatening to tear him apart. For a moment, the darkness around him flickered, revealing the boy he had once been. But then his smirk returned, colder than ever. "Nice try, old man. But I'm done listening to people like you." With a final burst of energy, he shattered the web of light and unleashed a surge of power so overwhelming that the battlefield itself seemed to vanish, replaced by an endless expanse of black and white. "This is my world now," Naruto declared, his voice echoing like a god's. "And no one will stand in my way." Ichigo sighed, his expression filled with sorrow. "So be it." The battle continued, their powers clashing in a struggle that would determine the fate of the world. But even as they fought, a question lingered in the air: was there still a chance for Naruto to find his way back, or had he truly become the god of destruction he claimed to be? The battlefield was no longer bound by the laws of the mortal realm. Naruto's power warped the landscape into an endless expanse of black and white, where the ground shifted and twisted like living ink, and the air was suffused with an oppressive stillness. Ichigo Romo floated at its center, his staff glowing faintly as he prepared for what felt like an eternal struggle. Naruto loomed above him, the brush in his hand shimmering with eldritch energy. His eyes glowed a deep, endless black, the kanji, God, hovering behind him like a halo. "This is my domain now," Naruto declared. "A world where your so-called balance is meaningless." Ichigo Romo raised his staff, his expression solemn but resolute. "Your pain and anger have brought you here, Naruto, but they do not have to define you. Even now, I see a glimmer of hope within you." Naruto's smirk twisted into a sneer. "Hope? That's what you cling to? Let me show you what hope looks like when it's crushed under the weight of true power." With a flick of his brush, Naruto painted, "Void," and a surge of darkness erupted from the ground, spreading outward in a wave that consumed everything in its path. The very fabric of space seemed to unravel, leaving behind an empty void. Ichigo Romo countered with a sweeping motion of his staff, summoning orbs of pure light that clashed with the darkness, creating bursts of energy that lit up the battlefield like supernovas. The strength of conviction. The battle raged on, each clash of power reshaping the surreal landscape around him. Hagoromo's attacks were precise, each strike aimed at breaking through Naruto's defenses without destroying him outright. "You fight with such determination," Naruto taunted, deflecting a blast of energy with a casual stroke of his brush. "But you're holding back. Afraid to go all out against me." "I don't want to destroy you, Naruto," Ichigo Romo replied. "I want to save you." Naruto's laugh was cold and hollow. "Save me? I don't need saving. I've already saved myself. This world never cared about me, so why should I care about it?" He painted, shatter, in mid-air, sending a storm of jagged energy shards flying toward Ichigo Romo. The sage waved his staff, forming a shield of radiant chakra that absorbed the attack. "You misunderstand, Naruto. You have immense power, but power without purpose leads to ruin. What will you do when there's nothing left to destroy?" Naruto hesitated for the briefest moment, but his defiance quickly returned. "Then I'll rebuild it in my image. A world where I make the rules." The Kage's resolve. Meanwhile, the five Kage, who had been pushed to the edges of the battlefield by the overwhelming clash of godlike forces, struggled to regroup. "We can't just stand here," Tsunade said, her voice strained but determined. "Naruto is beyond anything we've ever faced, but we have to try." Gaara nodded, his sand swirling protectively around him. "Even if it costs us our lives, we must give Ichigo Romo a chance to end this." Oniki floated nearby, his aged face grim. "Our techniques may not be enough to harm him directly, but if we can disrupt his focus, it might give the sage an opening." The Kage launched their attack, coordinating their efforts in a desperate bid to tip the scales. I charged forward with a lightning-infused punch, while Mei unleashed a torrent of acidic mist to obscure Naruto's vision. Gaara's sand surged in from all sides, attempting to bind Naruto long enough for Oniki to deliver a precise particle-style attack. Naruto barely acknowledged their efforts, his brush moving with fluid precision. He painted, silence, and the battlefield fell eerily quiet. The Kage's techniques fizzled out mid-flight, their energy dissipating harmlessly into the void. "I'm done entertaining you," Naruto said, his voice echoing unnaturally in the stillness. He painted, annihilation, and a wave of crushing energy radiated outward, forcing the Kage to retreat or face obliteration. The divine judgment. Ichigo Romo took advantage of the brief moment Naruto's attention was diverted, raising his staff high. The orbs of light around him began to spin faster, converging into a single point of blinding brilliance. "This is your last chance, Naruto," Ichigo Romo said, his voice heavy with finality. "Surrender, or face the full weight of my power." Naruto's response was immediate. He painted, immortal, across his chest, the characters glowing brightly as they etched themselves into his skin. "Do your worst, Naruto said, his smirk returning. I'll just rewrite the outcome. The clash that followed shook the very fabric of reality. Higoromo's attack descended like a divine judgment, its light piercing through the darkness with an intensity that seemed capable of erasing existence itself. Naruto countered by painting a massive kanji in the sky, reverse. The light twisted upon itself, reversing its trajectory and dissipating harmlessly. Higoromo's eyes widened in disbelief. You rewrote my technique. Naruto grinned, his aura pulsing with unrestrained power. I told you, old man. In my world, I make the rules. The moment of truth. Despite his overwhelming strength, Naruto felt a flicker of unease. The power he wielded was absolute, yet something about Higoromo's calm persistence unsettled him. You keep fighting, Naruto said, his voice quieter now. Even when you know you can't win. Why? Higoromo floated closer, his expression weary but unwavering. Because it's not about winning or losing, Naruto. It's about protecting the people who can't protect themselves. It's about giving them hope, even when all seems lost. Naruto's grip on his brush tightened. Hope is a lie. Perhaps, Higoromo said, his voice soft. But it's a lie worth believing in. For a moment, the battlefield stilled, the clash of godlike powers giving way to an uneasy silence. Naruto turned away, his expression unreadable. I'm done with this. He painted, and, in the air, and the battlefield dissolved, leaving behind only an empty void. Higoromo watched as Naruto began to fade into the darkness, his presence retreating into the abyss. Where will you go? Higoromo asked. Naruto glanced back, his smirk returning. Wherever I want. This world doesn't deserve me, and I don't need it. Let them have their hope. I'll find my own path. And with that, Naruto vanished, leaving behind a world forever changed by his presence. Epilogue. The five Kage stood in the ruins of the battlefield, their injuries severe but their spirits unbroken. Did we win? I asked, his voice hoarse. Higoromo shook his head. No. But perhaps, we gave him something to think about. Gaara stared at the horizon, his expression somber. And what happens if he returns? Then we will face him again, Higoromo said. But for now, we must rebuild and prepare for whatever comes next. As the sun rose over the shattered landscape, a fragile sense of hope began to take root, a hope that, despite his darkness, Naruto might one day find his way back to the light. The world had been left in chaos after Naruto's departure. The devastation he had unleashed was unlike anything the five Kage had ever seen. The landscape, once full of life and energy, now seemed muted, as though the very essence of the world had been drained from it. Even Higoromo, despite his divine strength, couldn't fully comprehend what Naruto had done. The Kage, though battered and worn, stood together in a rare moment of silence, each of them grappling with the aftermath of the battle. Do you think he'll ever return? Tsunade asked, her voice heavy with the weight of the question. She had seen many battles, faced down countless enemies, but the power Naruto had unleashed had shaken even her. His power is beyond our understanding, Gaara replied. His sand, usually so vibrant, now lay still at his feet, unmoving. But if anyone can come back from something like this, it's him. Higoromo remained silent, his gaze distant. He had seen many versions of this story throughout history, heroes who fell and were consumed by their own darkness, only to rise again with a different purpose. But Naruto's path was different. His power was absolute, and yet, it wasn't enough to silence the internal struggle that was beginning to stir within him. He's not finished yet, Higoromo said, his voice barely above a whisper. That much is certain. A new world. Far from the ruined battlefield, Naruto found himself standing on the edge of an infinite void. The world he had just left behind seemed like a distant memory, now replaced by an endless stretch of darkness that swirled around him. He had painted the end, but what came after? In this place, there were no boundaries, no rules, only possibilities. And yet, even as the godlike power surged through him, there was a nagging feeling that something was missing. Naruto stood in the center of this vast emptiness, his brush humming softly in his hand. The kanji, emptiness, shimmered in the air before vanishing. He closed his eyes, taking in the silence. There was no pain here, no rejection, no need to prove himself. For the first time in his life, there was peace. And yet, peace felt hollow. He had achieved everything he had set out to do. He was the god of this world. But what was the point of being all-powerful if there was no one left to challenge him, no one to fight against, no one to conquer? Naruto's thoughts were interrupted by the soft flutter of a distant presence. He turned his head, sensing someone who dared to approach. "It's been a while, Naruto." The voice was familiar, and yet distant. It felt like a remnant of a time long past. A flash of recognition flickered within him, and he knew who it was before he even turned fully to face the speaker. Jiraiya stood before him, looking exactly as he had when Naruto had last seen him. His usual carefree smile was gone, replaced with a solemn expression that mirrored the gravity of the situation. "You," Naruto muttered, eyes narrowing. "I thought you were gone." "I never really left," Jiraiya said, his gaze unwavering. "Even after all you've done, I'm still here. I'm still part of your world." Naruto gripped his brush tighter, the ink on its bristles beginning to darken as his emotions surged. "I don't need you here. I don't need anyone. I've already rewritten everything. This world is mine." Jiraiya's eyes softened. "I know. But rewriting the world doesn't mean you're free. It just means you're alone." "Shut up," Naruto snapped, his brush flicking in the air. The kanji, destruction, appeared in a flash, crackling with dark energy. With a wave, it sent a shockwave of pure power rippling through the void, but Jiraiya stood unmoving. "You've lost something," Jiraiya continued, his voice calm despite the chaos around him. "You've become a god, Naruto. But even gods need something to protect. Even gods need a purpose beyond their own power." Naruto felt the weight of Jiraiya's words, and for the briefest of moments, doubt crept in. He had been so consumed by his anger, his thirst for revenge, and his desire to prove himself that he had forgotten why he had fought in the first place. "You think I'm just like them, don't you?" Naruto muttered, his voice tinged with bitterness. "Just another fool chasing after an empty dream." Jiraiya shook his head. "No, Naruto. You've always had the potential to be more. To be the kind of leader this world needs. But not like this. Not by destroying everything." Naruto's expression twisted into something colder. "You think I care about this world anymore? They abandoned me. They cast me aside. I had to fight for everything. And now, I'll take what's mine." Jiraiya sighed deeply. "I know what it's like to feel abandoned. I know the weight of loneliness. But destroying everything won't bring you peace. It will only keep you in this endless cycle." Naruto stepped forward, his gaze hardening. "You can't stop me. No one can." "No," Jiraiya agreed, his expression never wavering. "I can't stop you. Only you can. The final choice." The words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Naruto stood frozen, the chaos swirling around him, but there was something different now. His thoughts began to fracture as his mind processed what Jiraiya had said. Despite all the power he had gained, despite all the destruction he had wrought, a part of him knew that the path he was on wouldn't lead to fulfillment. And yet, the thought of going back to the world that had rejected him seemed unbearable. Could he really change everything he had built? Could he even want to? A surge of conflicting emotions hit him like a wave, threatening to overwhelm him. His grip on his brush loosened slightly as he fought to maintain control over the power that surged within him. Jiraiya's presence seemed to anchor him, offering a sense of familiarity that he had long buried beneath the layers of anger and rage. "I don't know what to do," Naruto admitted, his voice quieter than before. Jiraiya smiled softly, a glint of understanding in his eyes. "That's okay, kid. Sometimes, not knowing is the first step toward finding the right answer." Naruto stared at the endless void before him, his eyes scanning the infinite nothingness. He had the power to reshape everything, to destroy or create, but the question remained, what was the purpose behind it all? Jiraiya's words echoed in his mind as he took a deep breath. "What if I don't want to be a god anymore? What if I just want something real?" Jiraiya's smile grew. "Then you've already made the first step." Naruto's grip on his brush tightened again, but this time, it wasn't in anger. He felt the power within him surge, but this time, it was different, controlled, purposeful. The kanji, creation, appeared in the air before him, glowing brightly with the promise of new beginnings. The dark energy around him began to dissipate, and for the first time, Naruto felt the weight of his actions lift. This was the beginning of a new path. A path that would be his own. With one final stroke, Naruto painted the kanji, future, across the sky, watching as it spread outward, weaving a new world, a world where he would not be a god, but a force for something greater. As the void faded and the world began to take shape, Naruto stood tall, no longer consumed by his rage, but by the potential of what lay ahead. The world had been broken, but it was not beyond repair. And Naruto, for the first time in his life, had found a reason to live beyond his own power. A new dawn. The world around Naruto began to change with his every thought. He could feel the pulse of his creation, the new reality unfolding with every stroke of his power. His mind buzzed with possibilities. The once empty and cold void was now rippling with energy as life slowly began to take shape. It was different from before this time. He wasn't simply destroying or reshaping the world out of anger. He was creating, not just for himself, but for something beyond his own desires. As the kanji, future, expanded across the sky, the world beneath him began to follow suit. The colors of dawn bled across the horizon, the deep blacks of the void giving way to soft hues of orange and purple. Trees began to sprout from the ground, their leaves shimmering with an ethereal glow. Rivers began to carve their paths through the land, the sounds of nature returning. This wasn't just the world of Konoha, nor any world Naruto had known. This was a world shaped by him, built from his power and will. But as life began to blossom, so too did the doubts that still lingered in Naruto's mind. He stood in the center of this new reality, watching it take shape around him, and yet, a question echoed in his mind. What now? It was clear he had control. He could mold this world as he pleased, bend it to his will. But could he truly find peace in it? Could this new reality give him the answers he sought? Was it even possible to escape the weight of his past? Peace, he murmured to himself, a bitter edge to the word. He had spent his whole life chasing it, and yet, it always seemed just beyond his reach. He had destroyed his old world, thinking it would give him the relief he sought, but now that it was gone, he felt as though something was still missing. You've created something beautiful, Jiraiya's voice interrupted his thoughts, pulling him from his spiraling doubts. But the real challenge, Naruto, will be in what you do with it. Naruto's eyes shifted to Jiraiya, who stood at his side, watching the world come alive. The sage's expression was not one of triumph, but of deep contemplation. What do you mean? Naruto asked, though he already had a sense of where Jiraiya was heading. You've rebuilt the world, Jiraiya continued, but now you have to decide what it will be. It's not just about power, Naruto. It's about how you choose to use that power. What kind of leader will you be? What kind of world will you create? Naruto's gaze drifted to the horizon, where the first rays of the new sun bathed the world in its light. The question Jiraiya posed was one he had never truly asked himself before. He had always been driven by the desire to be more, to prove himself, to take control of his fate. But now that he had everything he ever wanted, he felt like he was standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure of what to do next. Do I even want to lead? Naruto muttered, more to himself than to Jiraiya. You don't have to be a leader if you don't want to be, Jiraiya said, his tone gentle but firm. But if you're going to be a god in this world, Naruto, you can't just be an observer. You have to decide what kind of god you want to be. Naruto clenched his fists, his resolve hardening. He had never asked for this power, never asked to be the one to reshape the world. But now that it was in his hands, he couldn't simply walk away from it. He had already broken the old world. The question wasn't whether he could create a new one, it was what kind of new world he would create. I'll do it, Naruto said, his voice unwavering. I'll create something better. A world where no one has to suffer like I did. A world where no one is abandoned. Jiraiya nodded. That's the spirit, Naruto. But remember, creating a new world isn't the same as fixing what's broken. It's not just about removing the pain, it's about understanding it and learning from it. Naruto stood tall, feeling the weight of the responsibility settling on his shoulders. He had always carried the burden of loneliness, of being cast aside. But now, with the power to reshape everything, he had a choice. He could create a world of peace, but it would need more than just his will to bend it into shape. It would require understanding, compassion, and above all, sacrifice. I understand, Naruto said, his voice steady. I won't make the same mistakes again. The first step. The new world Naruto had created was filled with promise. But it was still fragile. Life was returning, but it was unshaped, undefined. Now, the true challenge began, establishing a foundation that would hold. Naruto began his journey across this new land, walking through villages that slowly began to take form, observing the people who were just beginning to remember what it meant to live in a world free from war. But there were still forces at play that Naruto couldn't yet understand. Even as he crafted the new world, he could feel the ripples of older energies, forces beyond his control that began to stir once more. Something dark and ancient, something that had not been fully eradicated, lingered beneath the surface. It was as if the universe itself was testing him. And Naruto welcomed the challenge. He continued to walk through the villages, seeking those who would become the foundation of his new world. He knew that to build something lasting, he needed people who shared his vision. He could create life, he could bring prosperity, but without a strong foundation, it would all be in vain. He found those people in the most unlikely of places. Small villages on the outskirts, people who had been overlooked by the great nations of the past. They were the forgotten ones, the ones who had always lived in the shadows. But in their eyes, Naruto saw the spark of potential. He saw a hunger for something better, something beyond the lies of the past. They weren't just survivors of the old world, they were its hope. Naruto knew that he had to be careful. He had the power to take control, to shape these people into instruments of his will. But he remembered Jiraiya's words, creating a new world wasn't just about power. It was about understanding. It was about giving people a chance to build something better, on their own terms. And so, Naruto became a guide, a leader who sought not to dominate, but to help others find their own strength. He gave them the tools to rebuild, the wisdom to learn from the past, and the will to forge ahead. He taught them that their future wasn't dictated by the past, it was theirs to shape. But even as he began to build this new world, a shadow loomed on the horizon. The darkness that had followed him from the old world was not gone. It was still there, biding its time. And Naruto knew that one day, it would return, testing him once more. When that day came, he would be ready. This time, He would not destroy the world to save it. He would protect it. He would fight for it not out of anger, but out of a deep, unshakable conviction that the future was worth fighting for. And in that fight, he would find his true purpose. The story of Naruto's new world had only just begun. The choices he made, the paths he walked, would shape everything to come. But this time, he was not alone. He had found something more valuable than power. He had found the strength to forge a future for all, not as a god, but as a protector. And with that, the future was finally his to create. The burden of creation. Naruto stood on the edge of a mountain, gazing out across the land he had shaped. The sun now rose high in the sky, casting its golden light on the rivers, forests, and valleys below. It was beautiful. A masterpiece, in a way. His masterpiece. But with beauty came responsibility, and Naruto could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on him. The world he had created was in its infancy, a fragile thing, still prone to collapse if it wasn't carefully nurtured. And despite his godlike powers, the more he pondered over the future, the more questions arose. Would his vision be enough? Could he truly create a perfect world? Or would the forces of destruction that had followed him from his old life eventually catch up to him, unraveling everything he had worked so hard to build? He had no answers. And that was the most frustrating part. Naruto, a voice called from behind him. He turned to see Jiraiya approaching, his sage robes flowing behind him. The older man's expression was unreadable, but Naruto could sense the weight of his thoughts as well. "You've done something remarkable," Jiraiya said, his voice thoughtful. "I've seen many things in my time, but never anything like this. You've given life to a world that was born from your will." Naruto nodded, though he couldn't help but feel a lingering unease. "But is it enough?" he asked, his voice low. "I've created this world, but what if it's not the right one? What if I've made a mistake?" Jiraiya didn't respond immediately, instead walking closer to Naruto and staring out over the world they now both shared. "You've made a world that is free. Free of the wars, the hatred, and the suffering that once plagued it. That's more than most can ever hope to achieve." "But freedom doesn't mean peace," Naruto said, his eyes narrowing as he thought of the bloodshed that had shaped his life. "I've seen too much. I've lost too much. What if all this is just a new kind of prison?" Jiraiya turned to face him, his expression softening. "That's the burden of creation, Naruto. You don't just make a world and walk away from it. You have to live with the consequences of your choices. But don't let the weight of those choices crush you. You've done more than anyone thought possible. Now you have to guide this world toward its future. And that means understanding the nature of your power." Naruto's gaze drifted to his hands, which still glowed with a faint, golden light, the lingering power of the kanji of creation. It was a power unlike anything he had ever known, one that allowed him to shape reality with a single thought. But with such power came immense responsibility. Could he truly guide this world? Could he ensure it wouldn't fall into chaos once again? "I can't do it alone," Naruto muttered. Jiraiya smiled, a faint chuckle escaping his lips. "You're not alone, Naruto. But you can't just rely on others to fix everything for you, either. You have to stand at the front and lead. And that means making hard choices." Naruto remained silent, contemplating Jiraiya's words. He had always wanted to lead, to prove his worth, but now that he had the power to do so, it felt like a curse. Was it possible to truly change the world for the better, or was the cycle of pain and suffering inescapable? And if it wasn't, what would he become in the process? A world in motion. Days passed, and Naruto continued to build his new world. The villages he had once visited began to grow, the people beginning to forge lives for themselves. They came from all walks of life, from forgotten corners of the old world, drawn by the promise of a fresh start. They had seen the destruction that Naruto had wrought, and they understood the magnitude of what he had created. Many worshipped him as a god, seeing in him the savior of their world. But Naruto knew better than to accept such blind adoration. The people needed more than a god, they needed a guide. Naruto spent countless hours walking through the villages, speaking with the people, understanding their fears and hopes. The world was still fragile, and he had to be careful. He had the power to destroy it as easily as he had built it. Yet, he knew that such a path would lead to nothing. He had learned that in his past power without understanding was useless. In one village, a young woman approached him, her eyes bright with determination. She was unlike most others Naruto had encountered. She wasn't in awe of his power or his strength. Instead, she saw him as something else, a potential ally. "You're the one who created this world, aren't you?" she asked, her voice steady. Naruto nodded, his expression unreadable. "I did. But this world isn't just mine. It's ours. I didn't do this alone." The woman smiled, a slight glint of respect in her eyes. "Then teach us. Help us build a future where we can stand together, not just under your rule, but as equals." The words hit Naruto harder than he expected. He had never thought of leadership in those terms. He had always seen himself as someone who needed to carry the burden alone, but here was a stranger asking him to share that responsibility. Could he do it? Could he trust others to help him guide this new world? "I'll teach you," Naruto said, a deep, almost reluctant resolution forming in his chest. "But we have to do this together. I won't be the one who leads you. I'll be the one who guides you, but the choices you make will determine the future. I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm here to help you figure it out." The woman nodded, clearly pleased with his answer. "Then we will rebuild, together." And with that, Naruto began the next phase of his journey. He wasn't just building a world anymore, he was teaching those who would inherit it how to live within it. He was becoming more than just a creator, he was becoming a mentor, a teacher, someone who would help guide the future generations into a better world. But not all was peaceful. As Naruto moved forward, whispers of unrest began to stir among the people. Not everyone agreed with his vision. Not everyone believed that peace could be achieved without a fight. The dark forces of the old world, the remnants of the chaos he had once lived through, still lurked in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Naruto could feel them. The familiar presence of darkness, something primal and ancient, stirring just beyond the horizon. And though he had the power to destroy it, he didn't want to. He knew that true peace would only come when the world's true enemies were understood, not simply eradicated. The true test was coming. The forces of destruction would soon reveal themselves. But Naruto would face them, not as a god seeking to dominate, but as a leader determined to forge a path forward, no matter what it cost him. The path of conflict. Months passed in the new world Naruto had created, and as the villages grew, so did the tension. There was progress, no doubt about it. But with progress came unrest. For every step forward, there were 2 steps back. Some, like the woman who had spoken to Naruto, saw the promise of a world rebuilt, of a fresh start. But others saw the cracks in the foundation, cracks that Naruto was unwilling to ignore. He had always known that peace wasn't permanent. The chaos that had ravaged the old world hadn't simply disappeared, it had been buried beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to re-emerge. And that moment was now. Naruto sat on a high plateau, overlooking the village he had helped to establish. His mind was clouded with thoughts of what was to come. The power he wielded, the kanji of creation, was unlike anything the world had ever seen. It allowed him to bend reality itself, to shape the world as he saw fit. But it wasn't infallible. There was always a price to pay for such power, and Naruto was well aware of the consequences. A disturbance rippled through the land. It wasn't visible to the naked eye, but Naruto could feel it deep within his bones. There was a presence in the air, a familiar one. He had encountered it before, during his years of wandering the land. It was the energy of conflict. The energy of war. "They're coming," Naruto muttered, standing and stretching his arms. He had hoped it would never come to this, but the truth was undeniable. Conflict was inevitable. People would always seek to dominate, to control, to destroy. It was in their nature. And that darkness was gathering, rising like a storm on the horizon. Naruto's eyes narrowed as he focused on the disturbance. It wasn't just a single group of enemies, it was a coalition, a gathering of warlords, rogue shinobi, and those who still clung to the old ways. They had come together, drawn by a single objective, to overthrow Naruto and reclaim the old world. "You should have known it wouldn't be this easy," Naruto muttered, his voice laced with frustration. He had worked too hard to build this world. Too hard to let it fall apart at the hands of those who refused to change. The gathering storm. The world Naruto had created was about to face its first true test. His creation was fragile, and even his godlike powers couldn't prevent the storm that was about to break. He had made it clear to his followers that there would be no easy path to peace, but even he hadn't anticipated the scale of the opposition that was now preparing to strike. Naruto descended from the plateau, his movements graceful but heavy with purpose. The wind howled around him, a stark contrast to the calm that he had worked so hard to cultivate. His feet touched the ground with a soft thud as he walked toward the gathering of the world's future. In the distance, he could already see the forces amassing. The banners of the old warlords fluttered in the wind, their crimson colors staining the horizon. They were numerous, but Naruto wasn't afraid. He had faced far worse in his past. He had the power to destroy them all. And yet, he didn't want to. Naruto understood now, in a way he never had before, that destruction was a tool, not a solution. It was the easy way out, the path that led to the same endless cycle of suffering. What he wanted was to break that cycle, to offer something different. Something better. But it was hard. Harder than he had ever imagined. The forces that stood against him were not just physical, they were ideological. They were the remnants of the old world, the people who refused to accept change, who clung to the past like a dying breath. A voice broke through his thoughts. "Naruto," Jiraiya said, stepping up behind him. The older man's expression was serious, more so than Naruto had seen in years. "We've got a problem. They're not just here to fight, they're here to end it. They think they can break you. They're going to try and force you back into the role of a monster." Naruto didn't respond immediately. His mind was already racing. He could feel the enemies approaching, their presence growing stronger with each passing moment. But instead of fear, a sense of determination bloomed within him. They wanted to make him a monster again? They wanted to challenge the vision he had created? Fine. He would show them what it meant to defy him. "Let them come," Naruto finally said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of an undeniable resolve. "I've dealt with monsters before. I've faced worse than them. If they want to fight, I'll give them the fight of their lives." Jiraiya looked at him, hesitation flickering in his eyes. But then he nodded. "Just be careful. Don't let the fight consume you. You've got something worth fighting for. Don't forget that." Naruto met his gaze, his expression hardening. "I won't forget." And with that, Naruto took a single step forward, toward the battlefield. The battlefield. The battlefield was set. The land that had once been a place of peace and prosperity was now a war zone. The enemies gathered in the distance, their faces twisted with hatred and fear. They had been deceived by the remnants of the old world, by those who wanted to see Naruto fall. But they didn't know what they were up against. Naruto's power was far beyond anything they could imagine. As he stood at the edge of the battlefield, the wind howling around him, his eyes scanned the enemy forces. They were well organized, their ranks filled with strong warriors and skilled tacticians. But none of them had the raw power that he commanded. None of them had the ability to bend reality itself. Naruto raised a hand, and the ground trembled. The sky darkened as he whispered a single word, break. And with that, the landscape shattered. Mountains crumbled, rivers twisted, and flowed in reverse, and the very air seemed to warp and distort. The power of the kanji of creation rippled out in all directions, warping the very fabric of reality around Naruto. His enemies recoiled in fear, unable to comprehend the scale of the destruction that was unfolding before them. You dare challenge me? Naruto's voice boomed, carrying across the battlefield like a clap of thunder. His form was surrounded by a dark, ethereal glow, and the kanji of creation was etched in the air around him. I am the creator of this world. I am the god of its future. And you, he gestured toward the enemies before him, his hand raised high, are nothing but ants beneath my heel. The enemy forces hesitated, but only for a moment. A warlord stepped forward, a man with a scar running across his face, his eyes filled with rage and defiance. You are nothing but a tyrant, the warlord shouted, his voice thick with hatred. You think you can bend reality to your will? You think you can remake the world and make it yours? We will stop you. We will bring you down. Naruto's eyes flickered with amusement. You think you can stop me? With a flick of his wrist, he summoned a massive wave of energy, crashing down upon the enemy forces. The ground beneath them split open as Naruto's power surged forward, obliterating everything in its path. Buildings crumbled, trees were uprooted, and men were tossed aside like rag dolls. The world around them was being rewritten in real time. But Naruto didn't stop there. He reached into the fabric of reality, altering it once more. The very laws of nature bent to his will as he cast the warlords and their armies into a state of perpetual confusion. The very ground they stood on shifted beneath their feet. The air itself thickened, making it impossible for them to breathe. You should have listened, Naruto said softly, his voice carrying across the battlefield. This world was never meant for destruction. But if you refuse to change, then you will only destroy yourselves. The reckoning. The remnants of the enemy forces were scattered across the broken landscape, their ranks shattered by Naruto's overwhelming might. The battlefield, once teeming with the energy of war, now lay silent save for the sound of the wind and the occasional cry of those who had survived. But there was no satisfaction in Naruto's heart. His eyes, filled with an eerie calmness, gazed upon the destruction he had caused. He had bent reality with a mere thought, and yet, he felt nothing. The kanji of creation continued to hover around him, crackling with energy, as though the very essence of the world was at his command. His enemies, those who had dared to rise against him, were nothing more than fleeting moments in the grand design he had set in motion. Naruto turned his gaze toward the wreckage, where the warlord who had challenged him now lay, broken, and gasping for air. The man, bloodied and trembling, could hardly speak. But Naruto could feel the pulse of his desperation, the last vestiges of his will. You still cling to the idea of resistance. Naruto's voice was a whisper, but it cut through the air like a blade. You can't win. No one can. The warlord, struggling to lift himself from the ground, looked up at Naruto, his eyes filled with defiance. You may have power, but you don't understand, the people will rise against you. The old world isn't gone. It's only been buried. Naruto's expression remained unchanged, his gaze unyielding. He could feel the warlord's fear, but it was more than that, there was something else. A deep-rooted belief that the world could not be changed, that the cycle of conflict would always continue. The old world, with its constant struggles for dominance, would forever remain in the hearts of those who refused to let go. Naruto raised his hand, and the world around him began to shift again. The ground beneath the warlord cracked open, and the sky darkened, as if in response to Naruto's thoughts. The air grew heavy with power, and the warlord's eyes widened in terror. He tried to move, to escape, but his body was paralyzed, held in place by the sheer force of Naruto's will. No, the warlord gasped, his voice weak. This can't be. Naruto's voice was calm, but there was a weight to it, a finality that made it clear there was no room for negotiation. The old world is gone. The cycle of hatred, the cycle of war, it ends here. With a single motion, Naruto's power surged, reshaping the warlord's reality. The man screamed in agony as his body began to disintegrate, his form breaking down into the very elements of the world itself. Dust. Stone. Wind. Fire. The warlord's life was snuffed out, his existence erased, as Naruto's power altered the very fabric of his being. There would be no trace left of him. No monument, no memory, just the echo of his failed defiance. Naruto stood there, unmoved, watching as the warlord's essence faded into nothingness. He didn't feel triumph or joy. He simply felt nothing. The world was changing, but Naruto had already moved past the need for validation. His power, his godlike abilities, were beyond the comprehension of anyone who could still cling to the old ways. And that was precisely why the world was better off without them. The new dawn. The wind calmed, and the sky began to clear. The battlefield, now reduced to nothing but broken earth and remnants of once proud soldiers, seemed to breathe in the aftermath of Naruto's will. The war had ended, but the warlords who had opposed him were not the only force in this world. Naruto knew that. He had always known that. He turned and began walking away from the carnage, his mind already shifting to what lay ahead. The villagers, the citizens of his world, were still waiting for him. They still looked to him for guidance, for leadership. He had promised them a new world, and he would deliver on that promise. But the old world was not so easily erased. It lingered, like a shadow, in the hearts of those who had been raised by its harsh teachings. There would be more resistance, more attempts to tear him down. But Naruto had come to understand something fundamental about the nature of power. Power was not about domination. It was not about control. It was about understanding. And Naruto understood the world in ways no one else did. He knew what it took to reshape it. He knew what it meant to forge a path through the darkness and into the light. And yet, as he walked, he felt a strange emptiness within him. The kanji of creation still hovered around him, its power pulsing with each step he took, but Naruto's heart felt distant from it all. The war had ended, and he had won, but at what cost? Was this truly the peace he had sought? Was this the world he had envisioned? He stopped in his tracks, his eyes narrowing as he sensed something. A presence. A familiar one. "You've done it, haven't you?" a voice called out from behind him. Naruto didn't need to turn around. He knew who it was. The voice, calm yet filled with authority, belonged to none other than Jiraiya. "I've done what I had to do," Naruto replied, his voice distant. Jiraiya approached, his footsteps slow but sure. "I see. The old world is gone, but what about the new one, Naruto? What is it you're really trying to build?" Naruto turned to face him, his expression unreadable. A world without the endless cycle of conflict. A world where people can live without fear. Jiraiya studied him for a long moment before speaking again. "And what about you, Naruto? What will you do when there's nothing left to fight for?" Naruto's eyes hardened. "I will continue to shape the world. There is always something left to do. There are always those who need guidance. And I will give it to them." Jiraiya's gaze softened, but there was a sadness in his eyes. "And what about yourself, Naruto? Will you ever find peace?" Naruto didn't answer. Instead, he turned away, his gaze focused on the horizon. He could feel the weight of the world bearing down on him, but he didn't care. His path was set. His purpose clear. "I don't need peace," he said softly, his voice barely audible. "I just need the world to change." And with that, Naruto walked away, his figure disappearing into the distance. The world he had created was his, but it was also an uncertain world, one that would require endless effort to maintain. Naruto didn't mind. He would do what was necessary. After all, he was the god of this world. Naruto continued his journey through the devastated lands, the remnants of war still fresh in his mind. The sky above was clear now, but the scars of battle remained etched into the earth, like a permanent mark upon the world. He moved through the broken cities with purpose, his mind distant, focused only on the task at hand. The kanji of creation followed him, shifting and swirling like a living entity, responding to his every thought and desire. His presence was a paradox, radiating absolute power yet untouched by any form of emotion. He could feel the eyes of the survivors upon him, those who had witnessed the cataclysm and now understood the extent of his abilities. Some feared him, others worshipped him. The world had changed, and they knew it. But despite the awe or terror he inspired, Naruto was indifferent. He didn't care how they saw him, nor did he care for their praise or scorn. The villagers, the remnants of the old world, would need to adapt. They would have to fall in line or be left behind. This was his reality now, the world he had created with his own hands. It would not be easy, but nothing ever was. His power had allowed him to end the wars, but it could not force the hearts of the people to change. That was something only time would achieve. As he approached a ruined city, the air felt heavy with anticipation. The villagers within had already heard whispers of his deeds, the destruction, the absolute power. Some would welcome him as their savior, while others would see him as a tyrant. But Naruto had long since stopped caring about the views of others. He had a goal. And he would see it through. A city in ruin. Naruto's footsteps echoed through the broken streets, a cold wind blowing through the empty buildings. His senses were heightened, his every movement sharp and purposeful. The people of the city, those who still lived, watched from their windows, peeking out to see the one who had reshaped the world. Some looked with fear, others with uncertainty. But none dared to approach him directly. At the center of the city stood a massive, crumbled statue, once a symbol of the old rulers, now reduced to rubble. It stood as a monument to the past, but it had no place in Naruto's world. He approached it without hesitation, his presence commanding the area around him. The kanji of creation flickered into the air, and with the simple motion of his hand, the statue began to disintegrate. It crumbled, turning to dust, as if Naruto's very will had torn it apart. As the statue fell, the ground beneath it began to crack and shift, the earth itself responding to his power. In a moment, the city's heart was reshaped. Where once the old statue stood, now there was a sprawling garden of trees and flowers, their roots digging deep into the earth, symbolizing growth and change. It was a subtle transformation, but it held a deeper meaning. The past was gone, and the new world had begun. Naruto stood in the center of the garden, his eyes closed for a moment as he took in the silence. The world was quiet now, as if it, too, was waiting for him to decide what would come next. He could feel the presence of the villagers, still hidden in their homes, unsure of what to make of the changes. One person, however, stepped forward. A man, older than the others, his face weathered by age and experience. He approached Naruto cautiously, his eyes full of questions but also a deep respect. "You've changed everything," the man said, his voice low but steady. "But what now? What do you want from us?" Naruto opened his eyes, locking his gaze on the man. There was no fear in his eyes, only curiosity. He was not a servant or a slave to the old world's ideals. No, this man was someone who could see beyond the surface. "I want nothing from you," Naruto said, his voice cold and clear. "I've already given you everything. A new world, a new beginning. What you do with it is up to you." The man's eyes narrowed, as if trying to understand Naruto's true intentions. "A new world? Is that all you've done?" destroyed the old one and left us with nothing but this empty landscape. Naruto didn't flinch. You'll find your way. I've given you the opportunity to rebuild, to shape something new. What you make of it is your choice. But understand this, I won't wait forever. The world will move forward, whether you're ready for it or not. The man stared at him for a long moment before nodding, his expression a mix of gratitude and apprehension. He turned back to the others, spreading Naruto's message. Some would understand, others would resist, but that was the nature of change. Not everyone could keep up with it. Naruto stood silently, watching them, feeling the weight of the world on his shoulders. He had no doubt that some would resist. They would fight against him, trying to drag the world back into the past. But he was beyond that now. He had outgrown the limitations of the old world. And he would not allow it to drag him down. The shadows of the past. As Naruto moved from city to city, reshaping the world in his image, he encountered resistance. Not from armies, not from generals or kings, but from the remnants of the old order, those who still clung to outdated ideologies, refusing to accept the new world. They formed factions, secret groups, their minds clouded by the past. But Naruto was relentless. His power, honed to perfection, allowed him to crush these rebellions before they could even take root. And yet, with each victory, a sense of emptiness grew within him. He no longer felt satisfaction in his victories, no joy in his power. The kanji of creation, which once felt like an extension of himself, now seemed like a burden. It was a constant reminder of his divine status, of the fact that he had reshaped the world, but for what? What was the point of all this destruction? What was the point of a world that had been remade if there was no one left to challenge him? To challenge the status quo? Naruto's mind raced as he walked through the halls of his new citadel, the remnants of war buried beneath his feet. The people who served him, the ones who accepted his new world, looked up to him, but what did they truly understand? Could they truly see beyond the surface? Or had they simply given up the fight, allowing themselves to be led by the one who had the power to change everything? His footsteps echoed through the vast hallways, the silence deafening in its intensity. As he passed by a series of windows, the reflection of his own face seemed to stare back at him, empty, distant, unfeeling. What had he become? A god? A ruler? A destroyer? He didn't have answers, and he didn't need them. At least, that's what he told himself. The burden of power. Days blurred into weeks, and Naruto's march through the world continued unabated. His power had no equal, his will unstoppable, yet there was an unsettling emptiness gnawing at him. He had reshaped the world. He had annihilated all who dared challenge him. And still, the nagging question remained, what was the point of it all? He had erased the old order, but what had been built in its place? Was the cycle truly broken, or had he simply traded one form of chaos for another? Naruto stood on a balcony overlooking his citadel, the city sprawling beneath him like an open wound, its streets now orderly and quiet. The once thriving villages and factions had either been absorbed into his domain or obliterated in the wake of his rise. The world had become a mirror of his power, an extension of his will. And yet, the silence rang in his ears like the toll of an unseen bell, marking time in a world that no longer had meaning beyond his own existence. A sharp gust of wind cut through the air, sending ripples through the kanji of creation that hovered ever present around him. He barely noticed it anymore. The symbols had become as much a part of him as his own chakra. They responded to his every command, bending reality itself to his will. And yet, with each passing day, they seemed less like a gift and more like a weight. From behind him, a familiar voice broke the silence. Naruto. He didn't need to turn around to know who it was. The voice was etched into his memory. Jiraiya. You're still the same, aren't you? Jiraiya said, his voice heavy with a mix of concern and admiration. Still so distant, so far removed from everything around you. Naruto remained silent, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He didn't have the energy to argue, nor the desire to explain himself. He knew Jiraiya, and he knew what the man would say. He had heard it all before, and it never seemed to change. The world around him may have been transformed, but Naruto still felt alone in it. Jiraiya stepped closer, his footsteps slow and deliberate. Do you even realize what you've done? You've shattered the old world. You've brought a new era, but at what cost? Naruto's eyes flickered briefly to the older man, but he said nothing. Look around you, Naruto. This isn't peace. It's just the absence of war, Jiraiya continued, his tone shifting to something softer, more pleading. Peace doesn't come from power alone. It comes from understanding, from empathy, from the connections we share with each other. And I know you, Naruto. I know you still care about those connections. The words hung in the air between them, but Naruto didn't respond. He couldn't. He had long since stopped caring about the bonds that once defined him. He had transcended them. His power, his godlike abilities, made him above the petty squabbles of humanity. The people would bend to his will, not out of choice, but out of necessity. And that was enough. I don't need their love, Jiraiya, Naruto finally said, his voice cold, distant. I don't need their acceptance. I built a world where no one needs to fight, no one needs to suffer. What more is there to it? Jiraiya's expression softened, but there was a hint of sadness in his eyes. Naruto, you're not just the god of this world. You're its creator. But no one can exist in isolation forever. Not even you. Naruto turned his back to Jiraiya, his gaze falling once again on the city below. I'm not interested in their emotions. They'll adapt. They'll understand, eventually. But what about you? Jiraiya asked, his voice gentle but firm. When will you understand that what you've created is not peace, it's control? You've won, yes. But there's nothing left for you to conquer. What are you going to do now, Naruto? Where will you go from here? Naruto's eyes narrowed. The weight of Jiraiya's words seemed to settle in the pit of his stomach, but he shook it off. He didn't need to answer. He didn't need to explain himself. He had already made his choice, and nothing could change that. I'll continue forward, Naruto said finally, his voice hardening. The world is mine now. I've already done everything necessary. The rest can figure itself out. The will of the people. Naruto's indifference only seemed to grow as time passed. He had shaped the world into his image, but there was an unmistakable void inside of him. The kanji of creation responded to his every whim, but it no longer brought him the satisfaction it once had. It was as though the act of creation had exhausted him, leaving behind a hollow existence. He continued to travel, visiting city after city, enforcing his rule, ensuring that no one would challenge him. People bowed before him, offering their obedience, but there was no joy in it. They didn't serve him out of respect, they served him out of fear, out of necessity. The villages had grown quiet, their once vibrant personality subdued under his overwhelming power. Despite his victory, Naruto felt like a stranger in his own world. He had built this empire, but the connections that had once defined him, his bonds with others, his relationships with those he had cared about, had withered. The villagers no longer saw him as the young ninja who had once dreamed of being Hokage. They saw him as something else, something beyond human, something godlike. They saw him as a force of nature, a being whose power could not be understood, only obeyed. And as the weeks stretched on, Naruto found himself questioning the very foundation of his existence. What had he truly achieved? The world was at peace, yes, but what kind of peace was it? A peace forged through fear and power, where his word was law and rebellion was crushed before it could even form. And then there was the matter of the resistance, the remnants of the old world that still fought against him in the shadows. They were small factions, barely holding on, but they refused to accept his rule. They whispered of rebellion, of a new uprising that would challenge his reign. But Naruto wasn't worried. He had crushed them once, and he would do it again. He would show them that defiance had no place in his world. But the resistance was not his true concern. His true concern was himself. For in this vast world, where he held absolute power, where he had reshaped reality itself, Naruto felt more alone than ever before. The ghost of the past. One evening, as Naruto sat in the throne room of his citadel, deep in thought, he was interrupted by a familiar presence. It wasn't Jiraiya this time. It was someone else. The air shifted, growing heavier as the figure approached. Naruto's eyes flicked upward, his senses sharp as ever. The figure that appeared before him was none other than Sasuke Uchiha. Sasuke stood in the doorway, his face expressionless, his Sharingan glowing faintly in the dim light of the room. Despite the vast gulf of power between them, the old rivalry still lingered between them. But this time, there was no animosity, no desire for battle. "You've won," Sasuke said quietly, his voice tinged with something unspoken. "You've changed the world. But what about you, Naruto? What's left for you now?" Naruto stared at Sasuke for a long moment, his eyes unreadable. The question hit him like a cold wave, one he had been avoiding for so long. What was left for him? He had reshaped everything, and yet, he was still left searching for meaning. "I've done what I needed to do," Naruto said, his voice low. "The world is mine. I've changed everything. But you? What are you doing here, Sasuke?" Sasuke walked forward, his gaze locked on Naruto. "I've come to see if you've truly become what you always wanted to be. The strongest, the one who could change everything. But it's not enough, is it?" Naruto's hand clenched into a fist. "It is enough. I've created a world where no one needs to fight. I've given them peace. What more is there to want?" Sasuke's eyes flickered with a touch of pity. "It's not about peace, Naruto. It's about what you do with it. You've created a world of control, not freedom. And you know it?" Naruto's gaze hardened. "What would you know of freedom, Sasuke? You've spent your life running from it." Sasuke's lips curled into a faint, almost bitter smile. "Maybe. But I understand one thing, power alone can't fill the emptiness inside. It never can." Naruto didn't respond. The weight of Sasuke's words lingered in the air between them, an uncomfortable truth that Naruto couldn't shake. He had created a new world, but what had he truly built? Was it peace, or was it simply the illusion of peace? Naruto stood in the silence of the room, the words of Sasuke lingering in the air, swirling like the very winds outside the citadel. The weight of the past and the present crushed down on him, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Naruto found himself questioning everything he had done. "I've given them peace," Naruto repeated, his voice almost a whisper. "I've given the world everything I never had. I've erased the old wars, the old systems that perpetuated suffering. What more is there?" Sasuke didn't speak at first, and the silence was almost unbearable. Then, his voice came, softer, but sharper than any blade. "You've erased conflict, yes. But what about struggle? What about growth? You can't protect people from everything, Naruto. You can't control their futures." The Uchiha took a step closer, eyes unwavering. "You've become a god in a world where gods never existed. But the truth is, even gods can break. Even gods can be wrong." The words hit Naruto with the force of a tidal wave. Sasuke's words weren't new, but the way they resonated, the doubt they sowed inside him, was something he hadn't expected. Was he wrong? Had he truly become a tyrant, despite his intentions? What are you saying? Naruto asked, his tone strained, his voice betraying a flicker of uncertainty he hadn't felt in years. Sasuke didn't respond immediately, instead locking eyes with him. His Sharingan gleamed faintly, but it wasn't the anger or rivalry of their past that Naruto saw in them. No, there was something far darker, a quiet understanding that only someone who had walked the same path of pain and isolation could offer. You built a world where no one can rise above, Sasuke finally said. A world where no one can ever challenge you. But that's not freedom. That's a cage, a gilded one, but a cage nonetheless. Naruto felt a ripple of something cold run through him. The words seemed to cut into him deeper than anything physical could. Sasuke was right. The peace he had created was a false one, a fragile illusion. And if the peace was a lie, what had he really accomplished? Then what would you have me do, Sasuke? Naruto's voice wavered now, frustration leaking through his tone. What am I supposed to do now? If not control them, then what? Let them fight and kill each other again? Let them live in the chaos I once knew. Sasuke shook his head. No. But power like yours should never be used to force people into submission. It should be used to guide, to give them the chance to choose for themselves. You took away their freedom to fight, but in doing so, you also took away their freedom to live. Naruto was silent, standing frozen as the weight of Sasuke's words sank in. The world he had created, the empire he ruled with unyielding power, was not the utopia he had hoped for. It was a prison. He had built it on a foundation of fear, of absolute control. And now, standing in the midst of it, he saw it for what it truly was. A world unchanged. Days passed in a blur. Sasuke left him that night, disappearing into the shadows like he always did. But Naruto didn't go back to his routine of ruling, of enforcing his will upon the world. Instead, he wandered the quiet halls of his citadel, his mind a storm of thoughts he couldn't quite comprehend. The kanji of creation still pulsed around him, still at his command, yet they felt distant now. They had always answered to his will, but for the first time, Naruto questioned whether they should. I've done this all for them, he muttered to himself as he paced through the grand chambers. I thought I could protect them. I thought I could give them peace. He clenched his fists. But what if they don't want peace like this? What if I've created a world where no one can truly live? The walls around him seemed to close in. He had made himself a god, but even gods couldn't escape the questions of their own hearts. As the days turned into weeks, Naruto found himself unable to focus on anything but the questions gnawing at him. His dreams, once filled with visions of a perfect world, now only brought him nightmares of endless battles, of people locked in eternal conflict with no resolution. And always, in the center of those dreams, was him, the one who had forced peace upon everyone, regardless of their will. His mind wandered to the village he had left behind, the people he had once called friends. Sakura, Hinata, Kakashi. They had been a part of his old life, the life he had abandoned in pursuit of something greater. But now, that life felt like a distant memory, a fading echo of a past that no longer mattered. It was only when he stood before the broken statues of the Hokage in Konoha that the true weight of his decisions finally sank in. The faces of his predecessors, men and women who had fought to protect their people, who had sacrificed everything for the sake of their village, now stood as silent witnesses to his actions. Naruto had followed in their footsteps, but he had done so without truly understanding the meaning of their sacrifices. The winds howled around the abandoned village, carrying with it the scent of old memories. As Naruto stood there, staring at the weathered stone faces, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the village itself was speaking to him, asking him to remember why he had started this journey in the first place. The rebirth of Naruto. Days later, Naruto returned to his citadel, his thoughts still in turmoil. He could no longer ignore the truth that had been revealed to him. The world he had created wasn't perfect. It was not a world of peace, but a world of subjugation. His will had shaped everything, but in the process, he had taken away the very essence of what made people human, their ability to choose, to struggle, and to grow. He stood before the kanji of creation, and for the first time in years, he questioned his use of it. The symbols pulsed faintly around him, their power unquestionable, yet their meaning now seemed hollow. "I can still fix this," he said softly, more to himself than anyone else. The decision, when it came, was not easy, but it was inevitable. He would reshape the world once more, not through force, but through freedom. He would allow the people of the world to choose their own paths, to live their own lives, even if it meant facing the darkness once again. Naruto's eyes glowed with newfound determination as the kanji of creation swirled around him, ready to heed his command. "I'll create a world where people can choose their own destinies," he whispered. "A world where they can live and die on their own terms." And just like that, the kanji began to shift, the very nature of reality itself warping under his will. He would no longer be a god. He would be something else, something more human. A protector, yes, but one who allowed the people to fight for their own futures. The winds of change were coming. And this time, Naruto would not force the world to bend to his will. He would lead it toward a future where all people could stand, not beneath him, but beside him. The shifting path. The world that Naruto had built stood still for a moment, but beneath its surface, the currents of change began to stir. As the kanji of creation shimmered around him, Naruto's mind was not focused on his power, but on the decision he had just made. The desire for freedom, not just for himself but for everyone in the world, had taken root in his heart, and with it came the understanding that true peace could never come from control alone. He gazed at the symbols swirling in the air before him, each one representing a facet of his power. The kanji of creation, the very thing that had shaped the world around him, was now at the center of his resolve. He would rewrite reality itself, this time not as a god, but as a guide. His voice broke the silence. "Let the world choose. Let them decide their own fate." The kanji flickered, and for a moment, the very fabric of reality trembled. The rules that Naruto had set in place, the world that he had forged with his own hands, began to shift. The immutable laws of the world, the foundation of his reign, started to unravel. Slowly, but surely, the world was returning to its natural state, one of chaos and unpredictability. But this chaos was different. It was not the mindless, senseless violence that once plagued the world. No, this was the chaos of potential, the chaos where growth, change, and discovery could thrive. Naruto felt the weight of his decision press down on him. He had sacrificed so much, so many moments of quiet joy, so many small victories that others had earned on their own, and now he was choosing to relinquish that power. But in the pit of his stomach, there was a fire that burned brighter than it ever had before. The freedom to choose, the ability for people to forge their own paths, was worth it? It was the only path that truly mattered. The birth of true freedom. Naruto stood at the edge of his citadel, watching as the world began to shift around him. The skies, once perpetually overcast with the weight of his will, cleared, revealing the bright blue that had been absent for so long. The sun, now free to rise and set as it chose, bathed the land in its light. For the first time in a long while, the land felt alive again, as though it could breathe, grow, and change. But Naruto knew that this wasn't enough. Freedom meant chaos. It meant uncertainty. And with that uncertainty came danger. But it also meant hope. Hope for those who would rise, not because they were born into a world shaped by a god, but because they had the will to shape it themselves. "I've created the opportunity," Naruto said to himself. "But it's up to them to take it." He looked down at his hands, his fingers curling around nothing as he grasped the remnants of his former power. The kanji still flickered around him, though now it was different. It wasn't an extension of his will anymore. It was a tool to help others find their own path, should they choose to use it. Naruto walked through the halls of his citadel one last time. It was time to leave this place behind, to let the world he had built stand on its own. He didn't need to rule them anymore. He didn't need to control them. The door to the citadel swung open, and Naruto stepped into the world outside. The wind was different now, carrying the scent of new possibilities. The road stretched out before him, leading to unknown places, unknown futures. And for the first time in a long time, Naruto felt a sense of peace. But it wasn't a peaceful world. No, it was a world brimming with potential, one that would require struggle, growth, and choices. And Naruto knew that this was the world he wanted to live in. A new path. As Naruto ventured into the wilderness, his mind wandered back to the old village Konoha. It had been years since he left it behind, years since he had last seen the faces of his old friends. He had been so focused on creating a perfect world, on forcing peace onto people, that he had forgotten the importance of personal bonds, the connections that had once made him who he was. Sakura, Sasuke, Hinata. He wondered what they were doing now. Were they still alive? Still fighting? Still living their lives? He couldn't answer those questions, not yet. But one thing was certain, he would find out. He would go back to Konoha, not as a ruler, but as a wanderer. A seeker of answers. The road to Konoha was long, but Naruto's steps were sure. As he walked, he could feel the changes around him. The land was alive, vibrant in ways it hadn't been in years. Flowers bloomed where they had once withered, the trees stood tall and proud, no longer bent by the weight of his power. The world had begun to heal. The reunion. By the time Naruto reached the gates of Konoha, it was dusk. The village was quiet, its streets bathed in the soft orange glow of the setting sun. It looked unchanged, as though time had passed by without altering its core. But Naruto knew better. The village had grown, just as he had, in ways that he couldn't fully understand. He entered without fanfare, no grand announcement. He didn't need to make a spectacle of it. The world, after all, had already seen the consequences of his power. What was left now was something far more important, the chance to live, to interact, to be human once again. His first stop was the Hokage's office. He wasn't sure what he expected, but when he walked through the door, he found it empty. The chair behind the desk was vacant. It was as though the office had been waiting for him, for someone to step in and take control. But that wasn't Naruto's place anymore. He turned away from the desk and left the building. Outside, the village was beginning to stir. People went about their daily lives, unaware of the man who had once shaped their world beyond recognition. The faces were different, but the spirit of the village remained the same. Naruto smiled, feeling the first flicker of something like happiness in his chest. A figure approached him, and for the first time in years, Naruto's heart skipped a beat. "Hinata," he murmured. The woman before him was older, her features more refined, but there was no mistaking the warmth in her eyes. She looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. "Naruto?" she asked, her voice quiet, but filled with emotion. He nodded, stepping forward. "I came back," he said, his voice softer than usual. "To see what's become of everything." Hinata's eyes softened, and for a moment, she didn't speak. She simply watched him, as though searching for the boy she had once known, the boy who had dreamed of becoming Hokage. But that Naruto was gone. In his place stood a man who had seen the full extent of his power and the consequences of wielding it. "You've changed," Hinata said finally, her voice tinged with sadness. "I had to," Naruto replied. "But I'm still me. Somewhere inside." Hinata didn't say anything at first, but then, her hand reached out, hesitantly, and placed itself on his. "You've always been yourself, Naruto. Even when you didn't know it." And in that moment, Naruto realized that, despite everything, despite all the power, all the decisions, all the sacrifices, he wasn't alone. The world he had fought for, the peace he had sought, it was still there. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The road ahead. Naruto stood at the threshold of the village, feeling the weight of his choices settle into place. The world was no longer his to control. It was theirs to shape. He would no longer be a god, he would be something far more powerful, a guide, a protector, a friend. As he walked into the night, the stars overhead glimmered with possibility. The future was uncertain, full of unknowns. But Naruto didn't fear it. For the first time in his life, he was free. And with that freedom came a new purpose, to walk alongside those who sought their own path, no matter where it might lead.